motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda as laid out.
Make the motion.
Mr. McCarthy, can I get a second? Mr. Buddy, any discussion? All those in favor? All right, no community open forum tonight. There are no blue cards. We'll move right into special presentations and turn it over to Ms. Michelle Alania, our Executive Director of Pupil Personnel Services.
Hello all.
Hello.
All right, let's see if I can get my PowerPoint up.
Sit through your presentation.
I'm really not tech-savvy, but
We have somebody here that does.
which one?
Let's work out the one we put on the desktop. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the,
One for the point.
make sure that's there's one.
Sorry, I missed
Yeah.
that.
Thanks, Blake.
Okay. All right, so while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to make a statement, and I want you to think about this statement. The whole premise tonight is I'm going to be looking at least restrictive environment and how well Central Square is doing that, but what does it mean? What does it actually mean? So when we think about, is it coming up? Okay. So this particular statement I'm going to make, I want you to think about it. Is it a truth or is it a misconception? The concept of least restrictive environment, LRE, demands that all students with disabilities be educated in a general education classroom. So just think about that for a moment. And with that premise, is that a truth or a misconception?
I would say it's a truth.
I'll say it's a misconception.
If you thought misconception, you are on the right path. Because least restrictive environment, it has been determined that it is not about to service all kids in gen ed classes. But the idea is that we want to make sure that we place students with a disability has their needs being adequately or appropriately met, and is there with their non-disabled classmates, family, community. Because many times a person who, or a student who has been identified as a student with a disability, where are we meeting their needs? So when we even think about an IEP, an individualized education program, we look at what they call the present levels of performance. So there's 4 sections that we're always looking at. What are their academic areas? How are we meeting those needs? We look at their social emotional component. We look at their physical component, and then their management needs. I see someone's at the door.
There's a glare, I couldn't see who it was. I was like, I don't know why they're waving at me.
I'm so sorry.
That's fine.
No problem.
Trying to get the air going.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Right out after the question.
You want a bar?
You might want to confirm one.
Yes.
So we'll go to the next slide. But I just want that as a premise, because you know what's nice about Central Square? We really are trying to factor in that least restrictive environment and paying attention to that. And one of the big things is the initiative with the differentiated instruction and how important that is. So we're focusing on abilities of kids, not their disabilities. So we're really trying to pay attention to how are we meeting the needs of all kids, regardless of whether or not they're classified or meet the eligibility requirements of a student with a disability, okay? Because under school age, they have to meet one of the 13 classifications, which was also in the packet that I had given you. So the first thing I want, well, not really the first thing, but the next thing I want to talk to you about is the blueprint for improved results for students with disabilities. So this particular blueprint, I did highlight this. The mission of the New York State Education Department, NYSED, Office of Special Education, supported by all offices within NYSED, is to ensure that students with disabilities have opportunities to benefit from high-quality instruction, to reach the same standards as all students, and to leave school prepared to successfully transition to school learning, living, and working. These are all very important. So in the blueprint, it has 7 principles that we must follow. But those 7 principles are good for all students, not just for students with disabilities. When I think of my students with disabilities, they're gen ed kids first. They are able to be part of the tiered system that we offer to all students, as well as any of those kinds of differentiated instruction. But when we decide that they meet those eligibility requirements or criteria as a student with a disability, the biggest change is that then we have to instruct them with specially designed instruction, individualized, hence the IEP, Individualized Education Program. So, and that can meet them in all sorts of environments, hence going back to least restrictive environment. But this guidance certainly gives me an idea of what the state is looking for when it comes with students with disabilities and how important that is. But some of the things, you can look up the blueprint. I didn't make a slide of it, but it was in your packet. And it has those 7 circles. I'm gonna mess you up, so I won't go there. All right, but what I will do is these underlying of those 7 principles is that communities, Board of Education, districts, school leaders must provide supports and professional development for teachers to meet those needs of students with disabilities. The other underlying part of those principles is that school principals and special ed administrators are fundamental in their roles as instructional leaders. So that's why it's so important. When we talk about our principals, we have PD time for them. We make sure that they have an understanding of these kinds of things so that they are strong instructional leaders to our teachers. All teachers are teachers of students with disabilities, and every teacher needs to be skilled in how to support and provide that differentiated and specially designed instruction. So specially designed instruction is a buzzword in special ed. That's what makes it special ed. We want to make sure that we're providing that. So down below, if you notice, I have a couple of numbers here. Right now, our total school age students with disabilities ages 6 to 21 are 505 based on this 2016-17 data, okay? It comes out, no, it's like a delay to it, that report card. And our total preschool students with disabilities, 94. We have definitely increased. Just a few years back, it was 54, and now it has increased to 94. And some of the reasons for that is child find. Also, kids, parents are a little savvy. They see something's going on, they want to know what's happening with their kids. So they're a little more proactive in reaching out to the districts. They find out that they can come through us and get assessed and see what's going on. All right, I'm ready for the next one. Thank you. So, continuing my further idea with the least restrictive environment, we look at 2 indicators, Indicator 5 and Indicator 6. There are 14 indicators that I am responsible for reporting on, and it changes year to year what I am responsible to report on. So recently, Indicator 5, we look at school age, least restrictive environment. Right now, we are meeting the target of New York State. We're doing well with that. What that means is that we are able to have kids in general ed settings and still receive their special ed service. So we're doing very, very well, and we have met that target. On the preschool side, however, you see that there's 2 here. There's measurement A and measurement B. Measurement A would be like you would have a student that's going to a preschool with other gen ed kids there, and their special ed service is being met there. We're not meeting that target. We primarily see lots of kiddos in measurement B count where we have those kids going to special classes and things like that and getting their special education there. So, any questions so far?
I've heard principals mention LRE with behavioral kids, is that just coincidence, or?
No, but see, this is the thing, we have to kind of think about behavioral as part of the social emotional component of the present levels of performance, and behavior can impact education. So, based on what kind of behavior is going on and how it's impacting the education, that's when we determine, is that the right placement for that student? But you're correct. I mean, it does go with that premise, but we always want to look at what kinds of things have we done? What kinds of things have we tried to help with the, shape the behavior, eliminate the behavior? Are we putting the right resources in? Have we done the right professional development to support teachers in that particular setting? So there's a whole layer of stuff before we move a kid for programming. So I hope that answers your.
It does, follow-up question, though, student with disability, is that someone that has an IEP, or?
Yes, always, yes. The student
Only
with a
IEP,
Yep, or a 504, well, it's a different category because 504 plan, even though they have some rights as a student with a disability, they fall under what we call ADA, which is American Disabilities Act. So it's not as strict as what we have to follow for a student that is eligible as a student with a disability and has an IEP.
So if I got my hand crushed, I would be on a 504, because that's not impacting my ability to process information, it's just impacting my ability to be able to write. I would be on a 504.
okay.
Okay. All right, so some of the trends that I see here at Central Square, right now, classification rate has decreased from 3 years ago, 14%. 3 years ago, it was about 17%. All this means is that how often are we saying that that student has a disability? Or can we, and are we using the tiered system that's in place? And what I mean by tiered system, there's 3 levels in the tiered system. What kinds of supports are we giving at level 1? That's a universal system. We do it for all kids. What's the second level? And what kind of interactions are we doing? Maybe it's a reading program they need. And then we have a higher level of tier 3. What is that about as far as, are we giving that student every possibility to close that gap prior to them being, I guess, meeting that eligibility requirement? We want to try to make sure that we're doing everything in our power before we go to that length under a classification. Like I said, there's 13 classifications, and it's very strict. And then we have to do certain things in order to follow those, like if a child is classified with autism, they may have a diagnosis, and that's one of the classifications, autism, or multiple disabilities, or other health impaired. Other health impaired, many times we see kiddos with ADHD and things like that under that particular classification. Preschool, as I have mentioned before, has definitely increased, and I've already mentioned those reasons why. Students with disabilities and graduation rates have increased. We actually meet the target by the state. They want it to, it's like 55.5%. So we're doing well, but honestly, it would be nice to see that graduation rate increase personally at a district level. Students with disabilities and dropout rates have stayed the same, around 17%. That's high. Because if you think about it, that's based on the number of students with disabilities. So 17% of 505 or even 600, that's a high number. So we want to see that decrease, and we have not met the target there.
So that 17% is part of the 34% that are graduating?
That's right.
So half of those that are graduating?
No, well, no, not necessarily. Let me think about the data. Hold on.
Yeah, because I don't think it's.
No.
He's right.
Yes, absolutely, yes, okay. I'm not a math person. But when I do see the data, and I've had time to kind of marinate on it, but yeah, I think.
The 91 number is from 16-17, you said. All these numbers are from
Yes.
16-17 school year, correct?
Yes,
When is the 54 from? Do we know?
3 years ago.
So 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16.
We've even seen an increase in 504 plans as well. There's been a trend with kids coming in with high anxiety, trauma-based experiences, different things like that. So we have seen an increase with 504 placement too.
Do you see that increase in preschool carrying on, or is it they're in and then they're out?
Not this, I do. What the data tells me is where do we need to be proactive? What other kind of supports are necessary to change the trend or improve it? So when I get a little bit deeper layer of looking at that, then I can really formulate what kind of district goals would be important and that align with our district mission. So that's what's going to be important about that. The trend is the trend based on parents are a little more savvy. Parents really don't know which way to go with some of their kids. The other thing too, like I said, we're seeing that increase with anxiety. ADHD is huge right now. We've seen an increase with diagnoses of autism. It's like 1 out of 54 now. I think it's even might have changed recently. But we're seeing those kinds of trends. I don't know if I answered your question.
So, do you think it would, that being higher at the preschool age over time will make the long haul go down?
That
Because
is-
you're getting them so much earlier?
Yes.
Early intervention.
That is a very good point, Maureen, because the more we're proactive with kiddos, I'm gonna go back to the dropout rate. Once a kid drops out, we have already, as a community, will have to support that person one way or the other. So it's better served if we can get them younger. So if we are seeing an increase there and helping with those kinds of interventions, then you will see a difference later.
And I can share, so as I mentioned all the time, so my son was identified really early. It was almost before he was 2, right before he was 2. And then he just recently was evaluated again, and they said because of all the interventions and supports in place, that it would be very hard to even evaluate him as being on the autism spectrum. Now, I had a conversation with a teacher in this building who came up to me and said, my child was diagnosed a year and a half later than your child, and my child is really struggling with the behavior parts of it. And the doctors that I've spoken with said there's a window in the development of a child's brain and whatnot, that there's a certain window, and when you get past it, you can't make that up. And so that will stay with them forever. And so it's so important to have that early intervention because, Maureen, that's a good point. If that can be identified early, my kid's gonna need a lot less resources than a student that is identified later that's gonna go through all of high school till they're 21 years old.
Well, and I think that what I'd like to see is really the overall strategy as to how you think you're going to deal with it. Because we got some really good numbers, right? 63.2, 66. And then the other one, as far as what the 70% dropout is, is the Red Hawk program that fall into this, or different elements, or you take the lessons learned from the Red Hawk program that be affected by those numbers. So, something similar, so it would be interesting to see what the strategic group planning on doing to address these numbers and what support you need from the board
Sure.
to get it. Because I think, my wife's a physical therapist, this is school age, probably 25 years, and she was a huge advocate of getting
Absolutely.
we got it.
Really
So if that's being hampered, right, not having to be able to do that, I think that we want to know just what Mr. O'Reilly says, because they're coming. So whether or not you have them at 5 is that increases, right, or 2.5, the 2.5 is much better than getting them at 5.
And you're gonna see too, with our data dashboards, forecast size and able to have, whether it's a special ed student or it's a general ed student, there's components that definitely attribute to a student's success, and their attendance rates affected by it, their grades and their behavior, and that is their involvement in extracurricular activities. Hayes just played the basketball game, unified basketball. And so, just by looking at it and talking to Coach Catano, those kids come to school. They're on a team. They don't wanna miss practice, you know what I mean, they don't wanna miss a
Right.
game. It's the same spillover.
Did that-
Michelle,
Oh, yes.
I was gonna mention about the data, I didn't know, when we were soliciting data points, that we were gonna monitor progress over years, were there any data points that you need that we should be incorporating into that data dashboard with respect to special education
Not at this
particularly?
point, as I'm fairly new and I'm getting acclimated to some of the data and even what we're doing locally as a district, within district. I will have another snapshot in October. We do the Vets Day. I'll have another snapshot. I'll have an updated school report card from New York State. And of course, every time I'm out there in the different schools, I get more information and understanding of some processes. So at this point, I would not want to have that part of that, but until I have a little bit better handle on what is it that we want to do and how does that align with our mission, okay?
And I'll say,
In school tool, is it, if a student has an IEP, is it
Yep.
somewhere identified on?
absolutely, there's a little
So-
puzzle piece right
So
there.
it seems like you'd be able to drill down with all these same things that we're talking about drilling down
Absolutely.
with.
And I'll say publicly, so it's been what, since January?
Yeah.
Since she's been with us, but Pearl can attest for this, the number of parents and staff members that have complimented you on CSE meetings and the process and the whole coming back and checking in and coming back in the classrooms and looking at it and talking to teachers and giving them pointers and whatnot, it's a pretty regular, so I publicly.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
But it is
I
a big,
appreciate
I mean, you talk to over 500 kids in a program, for lack of a better word for it, but you've got to develop to get, get it so you can have success.
Right, and even get
It's a
to
big
know the
deal.
teachers, what their style is, and even really understanding our program, because we have a continuum of service. But it's interesting, being at a different district and being here, the continuum of service in my mind is different than some of the local decisions, so, which is fine. But it's getting to know, is it really serving the cohort that we have and what the need is? Because that is ever changing. Even as we come up through, I know that I'm going to have to shift a few things so that we can certainly offer certain parts of the continuum based on the cohort that's coming through. A lot of, sensory issues. I see such an increase in sensory needs. And then I have to be thinking about, for my OT folks, like what kinds of PD do they need so that they can really help in the classroom? Those kinds of things. So that's going to be really important in the next year.
You mentioned the 17% was high. Do we know what the quote average, or, I don't mean the target, but what the average is, or what
I'm
makes you
trying
say
to
it's high?
recall, I don't know if it would be in here.
And while you're thinking about that, what is our average dropout rate across all our students?
Oh, it's
I just pulled it up in the report card.
87.
No, 87 was our graduation rate, so then
13.
13% would be our dropout.
Well,
Would that be dropout or fail?
dropout or not
Yeah.
graduating, but yeah.
That's
Well,
different.
so it's a good point. So the way that it works is, when it's reported out, it's 4 years. But then they also have a 5-year cohort and a 6-year cohort. So if you looked at ours,
Yes.
we're like third in the county, but again, compared to districts with our size, so the best graduation rate was Sandy Creek. They have a cohort of like 58 kids. So ours at 310, I believe is what it was. We're still up there. We're third overall, just behind, I believe, Sandy Creek in Mexico. But it jumps significantly for, if you wanted to say 5 years, it jumps up another like 5% of kids graduating after 5 years in that, so.
And that's a good point, Tom, because you have to pay attention to how many are really dropping out. It could be, it's supposed to be 14% or lower, according to the state target. But let's say you end up having 2 extra students that drop out that year, it can mess up that number because there's low number count. So, and it can drive that up to 17%.
Well, that too, but so are you saying that if you don't, when you're figuring that 17% number, you're not actually looking at how many students voluntarily removed themselves from the educational environment? Or are you looking at just students that didn't graduate?
In the 4 years,
Okay,
correct.
so they might not be dropped out, they may still be in the school.
And then graduate in the 5th year or a 6th
Okay,
year.
so that 17% would be the same. So some of those 17% aren't really, they're not dropouts, they just are still taking the classes?
Well, this is all according to
There we go.
this report from the state. So that's where these numbers are being driven
And
by.
this is public for anybody to go on the website.
Right. And I would have to look specifically as to the
So this one-
definition, but dropout would mean that they have left school, they did not
They're no longer
graduate.
attending.
That's right,
So this is Regents with a, it's an advanced distinction,
yes.
advanced designation. So when you look at this, you're looking at really at this one, but we're also looking here, because we talked about this before, special ed kids, it was either they were getting a local diploma, without that, they were just getting credentialed. And there are a lot of programs after high school, you actually have to have a diploma, that counts for them. If they were just getting credentialed, that severely limited their abilities to be able to go on to the program. And that gets into the whole 4+1 and the graduation options now the students have.
Pardon my ignorance, ADHD and AD, those are disabilities?
Yes, yes, they are. ADHD is attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity, and the ADD is without the hyperactivity. And they have certain
Recognized
characteristics.
disability.
Yes, they are.
But only if they're on a IEP,
No,
right?
No.
You-
That's
you can-
exactly what I'm clarifying.
you can be a student who's diagnosed with ADHD or ADD and not have a 504 plan or have an IEP.
If the school doesn't even know about it, how would it make it into these metrics?
But a person that may have a diagnosis of something may actually not meet eligibility criteria, because it's all based on how does it impact their education. That's the primary idea or reason to have an IEP. How is it impacting their education? If you have a kiddo that's acing all their subjects and they're doing well on the regents and they're on par for graduation, and they're doing it without extra supports, or they're just utilizing some of those tiered supports, then they are not identified as a student with a disability.
As long as there's not a condition that's impeding them from learning,
That's right.
then they
What's the
could
gap?
have ADHD, they could have a number of different things that would qualify them if that actually was impeding.
That's right,
So we do have a good amount of students, I believe, that have ADHD that
yes.
aren't in those numbers.
Well, it's a societal thing today, with all due respect. I mean, those numbers just continue to fly through the roof, and I'll go on my dissertation real quickly. As long as you have the decay of the family unit, these numbers are just gonna continue to plow higher and higher and higher. It's just a fact of life.
Well, let me talk you down.
Good luck
It's
with
gonna be
that.
tough to do, but please try.
Well, you know what, when I have been doing special ed. I've been in special ed a very long time. And when I see these numbers, they are not as high as some of the other districts that I've been part of. And so I have to say, they have been pretty consistent. But we, as a district, need to pay attention to the fact that when we see ADHD being repeatedly as one of the big diagnoses and things like that, we as teachers want to focus in on the abilities and say, what can we do to meet that need of that kid? Especially if we're seeing a lot of kids coming in with that diagnosis. Doesn't mean that kid has got to be a student with a disability.
No, but to Tim's point, what we have is I think we have a growing number of parents that are saying, that don't have, that aren't giving their kids the coping skills
Oh,
and
I
the
agree,
structure.
I agree with that,
And
right.
as a result of
Thank you for
the lack of parenting,
Absolutely.
we have some, like, if it's in my family, things that we're helping my son, would be drastically different if it's someone that just puts an iPad in front of their kids, the kids plays games the whole time. That kid's not gonna get that.
And we, go ahead, Tim.
All you have to do is go out to a restaurant, and you see it everywhere, and it is a frustration, and I hate to be a naysayer, but I will argue that in 3 years, that 91 is 140, I'll almost guarantee it. And I hate to be a naysayer,
Oh, for the
but-
preschool level.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're really, I struggle with it, is our teachers primarily, and our staff, but our teachers primarily, are becoming the parents of these children.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's tragic, and I don't know what well, I don't know if there's an answer, quite candidly. It's gotta flip at some point,
Well,
but
I
it's a real.
think that you have to, the district has to be prepared, because I talk about this a lot too, and I would agree with you. But now you have to talk about what the solution's gonna be. So you're gonna get the child at 5, and we've gotta teach them the skill sets that they're not getting at home. That, to me, that's a realization of what we're gonna have to address. So teaching them how to be a good person, that's kind and sharing, and all those things that you would normally think that they would get at home.
Well, but think about it, the demographic is changing, it's not just here, but it's everywhere. If you look at the number, the last 100 families that moved out of our district, and then you look at the last 100 that are coming in, they're high needs, social, emotional issues, things that you just probably saw today in the paper with a student. I mean, these are the things that we're dealing with constantly. It is a different demographic. So again, we can do the things we can do with provide professional development, because unfortunately, and I had this conversation with all the superintendents in our county, it is getting difficult across the board with what's coming in. I mean, there are still families that move in here and they're, they're there, they're doing the things at home, but we are getting an increasing amount of students. Some of the students were here, probably more, who were the dropouts, the ones that, did, suspensions, chronic suspensions, blah, blah, and now they're having kids really young, and those kids are in our elementary buildings, so.
And I'm not saying, we do have to support it, and that's our job, I get that, but it's. I'm gonna.
The job's only gonna get bigger, is
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely, and
But
the
see,
challenge is gonna get more significant. And again, not to be a naysayer, but if I'm here in 3 years, my 3 more years, which I hope to be, I'm gonna guess that that's gonna be significantly more.
And I'll go on record to say that the government should put aid to people with courses, parenting courses, there should be something to be able to break that cycle, I agree.
So let me go back to the guiding principles from the blueprint. And the second one says, parents and other family members are engaged as meaningful partners in the special education process and the education of their child. So as a district, that's one thing that we can begin to look at. How are we engaging our parents? I know when I think about, some of the parents, they've had some not so nice experiences, and they may not feel very comfortable coming to the district for their things. So that's one thing to kind of be looking at. How do we foster a partnership and continue that open door policy for parents, and especially when it comes to their education? We see kids that time and time again, their attendance is very low. Or we see that open houses, we see maybe a handful of parents as opposed to, who really needs to be there. And it doesn't matter if we have cake and ice cream to give, the buy-in isn't there. But it's not even the buy-in. Sometimes they just don't know any different. And so there's so many different things with that to kind of consider.
So it's not an easy, I'm not sitting here saying it's an easy solution.
No, it isn't, because
This is far reaching.
it truly is, and it is across the board. It's not just
No,
our
no.
district.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
I hope I didn't infer, if I inferred that was not right. It is across,
Oh,
not only the state, it's across.
All that in mind with the use of all other resources that they can do in the future.
That's right. But I always like to think of things in the positive.
I usually do too.
What'd you say, Tim?
I usually do as well. So I
When the Red Sox were like in our 5th place.
Okay. So students with disabilities and suspension rates, we definitely met the target, so we're good there. Parent involvement as of 2016-17, we just talked about that. We did not meet the target. So this is definitely
So
something.
how do they measure that?
Yeah, how do they measure that?
There's a percentage, they do the whole thing.
That's interesting, I've never seen that.
Is it like parents going to open houses and stuff? Or they
Not necessarily, but they do have a method as to how they do it. First of all, it comes from some of my indicator reports. So it's gonna go from my indicator report. And so I capture the data, I report it to the state. The state does a formula for us. So that one would be
disability?
Yeah.
It may
Or-
be, it may
I'm
be
sorry.
participate, so parents who participate in CSE, CPS.
Okay, attending the meetings.
Yes, who participate, so we're looking at those things.
I do also attend hearings now, and it's shocking that the students that have 9K are the ones that parents aren't at. So we're without the parents.
It would be interesting, it doesn't change our result rate, but I just think there's 650 plus districts in New York, how many of them fit state cargo?
Now, that is a very good question, and you will get that information in the October presentation. Because then you can collectively see how do we compare with the rest of the state, and that's going to be very important information.
Well, and right now, you can go on this website, you can click on Onondaga County, you can click on Oswego County, you can click on, and just get those numbers.
Yes.
And then you can just drill down per school.
Do they have a measurement for gen ed population, for example? Or do they only
I've never
do it?
seen.
No.
See, but if they do it by CSE meetings and stuff, there's not necessarily a meeting with that, and that,
Right.
so.
But because of the way we're funded, that's why we have these indicators that we have to know about funding.
Oh, that's.
It's all about funding, so.
There's also a survey that's done for students, for parents of students with disabilities, and 50% of parents have reported that schools facilitated parent involvement to improve services and results for students. So that's part of
But nothing.
And we don't have to report it every year. Some things are not reportable every year. So it kind of gives you a little time, and then you have to report it. Okay, let me see here. Higher teaching assistant request for justification at CSE meetings. So I'm seeing more and more of this, and I haven't gotten a total handle on the teaching assistant support. And it's interesting how each building handles different things certain ways. So, but it's okay. I mean, kids need support. And sometimes it's a kind of a, let me think of it this way. Sometimes it's not a one-to-one. It may be that that student needs extra support for writing. So that number can seem inflated when actually one TA could be servicing 5 to 10 kids.
And it's important that I can say, and I can speak it from my own personal experience, that sometimes it's the classroom teacher that is trying to look out for that kid and that
For
family
safety,
and says, your kid, fight for it one-to-one, fight for one-to-one, it's another body to help get, fight for the one-to-one. Because when my son qualified, I had teachers in the district saying, get that one-to-one, get that one-to-one. And I'm glad that I said, no, let's see how he can do without what would be a crutch. And he's off the charts, he's reading, nobody else is reading, he didn't need it. So sometimes teachers would, and I did it when I was a teacher, I was the one on that committee fighting, let's give the kid a one, if he can get it, let's give it to him. And now I realize it's not always the best thing for a kid.
That's right. And the other thing too, I always try to think about how else are we supporting kids? We have so much technology out there, and sometimes it's a matter of an assistive tech eval and what kinds of apps are out there that can also assist just as well, especially when it comes to writing or doing math or those kinds of content areas. New cohort with social emotional needs, and we already talked about that, and I got 10 minutes for it. All right, my thoughts.
I actually thought you were done, that's why I brought it up.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know you were still on, I apologize.
So what's next? So in October, after Vets Day, I will have the opportunity to really look at, what that little snapshot is, what the data is at that time, and that is when I'm going to implement a special ed district plan that you guys can look at ahead of time, way ahead of time, and have a time to really approve it. Because I need the special ed district plan approved by the Board of Education. And then it's specifically going to say, what do we offer under the continuum of service and those kinds of things. And to have your assurance that we will continue to support students with disabilities. So that will be the next step. And then you'll have an opportunity to do that. The one that's available now was adopted back in 2016. So we'll just be able to update that, and we can determine, do we want to do it only for 1 year or have it for 2 years and then update regularly, however we want to do that. But that can be discussion. So the one thing that I would like to leave you with, I have given you my thoughts throughout, so I don't think you want to hear any more of my thoughts. But,
Oh, yes, we do.
More presentation?
but the bottom line is, I want to share this story. I love to read Disability Scoops, or Disability Scoop it's called. It's online. It has some very interesting things, and it even has some personal touches. So this particular one I'd like to share with you. And just because it's special ed, sometimes stuff like this gets to my heart. So I'm sorry if I get a little emotional. Woman with Down syndrome earns bachelor's degree. Now, when you hear that, you're kind of like, what? But just hear me out. So in Lexington, Kentucky, her name is Megan McCormick, 30 years old. And she has been in the spotlight more than most people. She's been in the spotlight. In 2013, she became the first student with Down syndrome to graduate from Bluegrass Community and Technical College with an associate degree in education. 2 years ago, she made headlines when she returned to work part-time as their teacher assistant at Mill Creek Elementary, and that was the same elementary school she had attended. This month, she reached another huge milestone, graduating with a bachelor's degree from the University of Kentucky. She is believed to be the first person with Down syndrome to graduate from the University of Kentucky, although complete records have not been kept. And yet, to Megan McCormick, all of these achievements, all the things people told her she couldn't do, are just steps in her lifelong quest to show the world that someone with varying abilities, as she describes it, could get an education that leads to a full-time job working with kids like her. So I'm going to end with this little statement from her. I want them to learn from me. I came out of special ed to teach those kids, to help them fulfill their potential, to do what they want. I want them to focus on their abilities, not their disabilities. I want to open doors wherever they may be. So that's where I'm going to end. Thank you. No, that's okay.
Yeah. You can't end with questions.
Oh, that's true. Good point.
No, I've said it a couple times, and I know it, it probably gets lots of people's blood pressure up, but, no, I've said before, one of the beefs I have, or maybe I'd like to see change, is like the whole concept of IEP. That's not the problem I have, by the way. No, I love
Because
my
that's
wife.
state-driven, I can't.
No, I
change
get
it.
that. They need to change the way they do it, but the idea of it is fantastic. What I don't like is that it's relegated to that segment of the population. Like, I believe education is gonna get it right when every student has an individualized education plan. Like that. And so I guess my point is, isn't it a different name? Like, differentiated instruction is an IEP, not as detailed, doesn't, you know, I might
It's a
spend
tier
6
one-
hours
it's a tier
on
one,
an
sir.
IEP, but, and so I guess my question is, how do we take, just like we talked in the past about city BOCES, how do we take the stigma out of special education?
When we look at people like, what was her first name?
Megan.
Megan McCormick, I kept thinking McCormick. When we think of Megan McCormick, and we think that she has an ability to do something and to offer the world. And you mentioned several things in what you had just commented on. First of all, differentiated instruction is a philosophy, and not everybody embraces that philosophy. But here at Central Square, we embrace that philosophy, and we want it for all kids. That's the way, what I have learned so far in my short time of being here. So we want to continue that. With that being stated, that means we want that for all kids. Gen Ed, students with disabilities, it doesn't matter. So we have, as a district, certainly have been looking at how are we implementing our tiered service? What are our universal first line of defense to help that kid? Doesn't matter if they're Gen Ed or a student with a disability.
And it goes back to what Tim said. So in my own situation, if we didn't do all of those things when he was evaluated at Margaret Williams, if we didn't do that, then he would be showing massive behavior problems in school right now and issues. He's in pre-K reading at a second grade level. He helps his older brother read things that he can't read. His math is off the charts. If we didn't give him the coping skills, because at that point he was banging his head on the ground, he was having all those tantrums, then it all just stopped. But that's because we put the time in at home. Unfortunately, that's not the norm. And then what we see is a lot of these behavioral things that teachers are, and I get it, it's very hard teaching your class when you have tantrums every, you know,
Right.
10 minutes, you gotta clear the kids out of your room.
Oh, she's,
And then just one other kind of random thought. Again, I only know from my perspective. So my wife's
Of course.
special education teacher in the Depot district. Do we have, she's a co-teacher, so it's a 11th grade English class and two teachers in there. How many
ICT?
classes like that?
Integrated co-teaching, how many do we have here?
I know we have, I think, I want to say the number, we have over 154 participating in integrated co-teaching scenarios, from
Me,
kindergarten through 12th grade.
Want to know how many classes?
Co-teachers?
If you're asking me how many teachers, how many actual classes where we have integrated co-teaching going
Oh,
on?
no, that's fine.
Well, she's counting.
I have, we have several.
I was just working on.
I think it's in my other binder.
Every building, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
And again, I'm going to give you more of those data points come October, just because of the timeline, and I'm in the midst of the CSC meetings, so I was able to capture some of the key points that I thought might be beneficial.
And
right
all
now.
kids benefit in integrated co-teaching, general ed kids, because that's just another support. That's another.
But we definitely want that trend to continue as much as possible.
So you mentioned some statistics that are only done every other year, right?
Yep,
Could that be a reason for the delay in the total data?
yes. Yep. All right, well, thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, great job.
16 ICT classes just at the middle school.
16?
That's ICT, it doesn't count CT and DCT, which are consultant teacher and non-consultant.
And are they across all subjects or?
Pretty much. Mostly the content, Spanish, English, math, social studies, science. Very rarely do you have them in the special areas because of those with additional love support.
Yep.
That's what it is.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move into item E, reports, unfinished business. I was gonna say, a couple anywhere. The first one's for you. You want to give the board an update on the data?
Yeah, so at the
goals?
next board meeting regarding data, I'm gonna be giving you, and again, kind of staying with the special education theme, just to refresh your memory, it was to reviewing the historical data for rates of attendance at all grades and breaking out special ed, rates of graduation and breaking out special ed, academically successful special education students that are recognized by the state education department. And then we're gonna be talking about, and again, that's where I've been working with Michelle, is developing what are those targets for 1, 2, 3, 5 years, looking at the data points. Also, besides just the special ed part, the three other big things that we're looking at is the reading initiative. And so to kind of touch upon, piggyback Aaron Phillips' presentation from the last board meeting, was how we're tracking that, and we're gonna be using DIBELS, kindergarten through 5th grade, to literally be able to track, to see if we're making the progress that we needed to make, going back to the research that showed that students that aren't reading at grade level after 3rd grade are 4 times less likely to graduate with their proficient readers in their cohort. The next part that's gonna be in the dashboards, Arena has done a great job, and we've put in sports and we've put in music band. So for the first time, now we're gonna have in School Tool, you're gonna be able to, generate the reports live for a student, let's say, that's in band or music. We're gonna be able to see that. So then that's huge. So then when we're talking about what's a profile of success, we can say to parents in the younger grades, this is why it is important for them to, be in band or music. Kids that on average in band and music have, this percentage for attendance, this percentage for grade point average, and this percentage for behavioral referrals compared to, the total number. And we can do the same thing with sports. And the research shows students that play a sport, there's a GPA. Students that play an instrument that's in band, there's another. And then there's research that shows the kids that do both, it's like off the charts. But the next part that's gonna go into the clubs and activities, because I think that's important when we're talking about, let's say, like DECA. That gets mentioned all the time. We had a panel of 9 students come in this very room about 4 hours ago, They graduated all last year, that went the college university pathway. And these students were awesome at telling us the things that were really good, that Paul D. Moore prepared them for, but then other things that it was great that Kristen Enright was in the room and was able to hear this. And one of the business teachers was able to hear this and go, oh, wow, that's good for us to be able to continuously improve. But it's great to be able to say to a parent that doesn't really know exactly, we can say, here's the average, grade point average. And there's the outliers, like Tim's daughter had like 109 average. So if you get her out of the mix, she was there. But the average, when I first looked, and I was looking at kids in DECA and I was doing the math, it was something like a 96% grade point average. The attendance was like phenomenal. And obviously behavior referrals were like non-existent. But those are the things that I want to be able to touch upon. But also clubs and activities. Mr. Minch, I had your son was in the room today and was talking about some of the things for his things that were successful for him. Same thing. He did mention that the smallest class, he's at RIT, right?
No, University of Rochester.
University of Rochester, it was 85 kids in the class. So it was those skill sets of giving a kid a book and preparing them. And it's funny because it's what the kids complained about when they would come down and talk to me, when they would hear, oh my God, the way this teacher teaches class, and they were like, wow, that's how it is in college. Like, they give us this book and they expect us to read 3 chapters in 2 nights and answer all the, and that's how it is. Oh, so getting back to that, so it's the reading initiative and that data, it's the clubs and activities and extracurricular in that, and then it is for the rigorous part, because all of these align to our mission statement, it's the AP and college credit-bearing courses that the students took, and that's the one huge thing that all the students that were in the room earlier today, that graduated last year, said, is those AP courses. Those are the ones that they felt are the most rigorous, that prepared them for college. So it really kind of gave us some weakness to kind of hone in. So I know that part of the data wasn't just the goal part that had a lot to do with special ed, but I'm going to include that as well, since they are our priorities, and you're going to see that.
So, Pearl, if you can put on our presentation for June 3rd, probably present data updating and goals for those daily goals. Yeah, any other questions on the data part of this? June 3rd would be that.
Yeah, so, yeah. Oh, it's super easy. Once in schools, we can extrapolate that out and build those profiles to say, students are playing sports, here's the average attendance.
Congress, that relates to middle and high school?
For playing clubs
For
and
the involvement
activities.
and things like that.
I couldn't be more excited about this. Right, always, all everything. Right, it should be, they should be out, but period. And then give this initiative, it should go to a national data as far as the effectiveness of the overall program. So I think to me, it's right. I think it's very
Because it's a science, and then unfortunately, our elementary teachers, a lot of them didn't have the background in literacy, so it's no fault of their own, but gone are the days where you had popcorn reading, where you kind of just be like, you're reading the next paragraph, the data shows, that's when most kids all of a sudden have headaches and have to go to the nurse's office, because they're definitely afraid to read out loud. That's not a reading program. So now by putting this in, there's actually the science behind the reading, so it is exciting.
Well, absenteeism on Thursday, because that's quiz day.
Yep.
Data-driven decisions.
That's right.
That's the best way.
All right, open it up for board member topics, start with our student board rep. Anything you'd like to bring up?
We just had our unified basketball game today, we got 3rd place.
Nice.
Out of 12 total teams.
Second season as a rep, son. Nice, that's good. Anything else, board members?
I would just like to say, because I don't want it to come across, Michelle, to you directly, I truly support the special ed program. My frustration is with the the side that is either abused by parents or whatever, you know, there is that side of it that, so I don't want you to leave here, and I don't want people watching that, because what's in here is doesn't support, I mean, if a child has a disability, you can take all my taxpayer dollars, all mine personally, and pay for that stuff. But it's when it's abused that I get frustrated. So, I just want to make that clear for the record, that I'm not against special ed, and it's not that I don't support it. There are children that need it, absolutely 100% agree, but I do believe that number is frightening, scary, and not all required. So,
It's not a supplement to good parenting.
correct. So, I just wanted to make that clear, so thank you.
Anyone else? All right, we'll go through my somewhat short list. Number one, reminder, the superintendent's appraisal for all the board members is due in theory today. As soon as you can, sending it to Pearl is fine, she'll consolidate for us. And then the June 3rd meeting, we'll have an executive session to do our board self-appraisal. The next meeting, which I can't remember, was it 17th?
Yes.
17th, we'll have an executive session after, at the end of the meeting, because we want to, it's also our retiree recognition that night, to do the superintendent's annual appraisal, so. So that's that reminder. Budget vote, and board of election and capital project and transportation, all that is tomorrow, obviously. But just a reminder to the board, we don't know yet when we're gonna have to try to get 5 of us together to certify the results. If we do not have affidavit ballots, then we need to do it within 24 hours, 48 hours? Within 24 hours. So, my first question is, I will be here tomorrow night. In theory, results will be in by, say, 9:30. I'll be here. If we have 5 here and there's not affidavit results, then the 5 of us can certify and be done with it, not have to call a special meeting at all. The only risk in doing that is, don't come here thinking that that's a done deal, because chances are, I would think, we're gonna have an affidavit ballot, in which case we would need a meeting on March 29th. Sorry, May 29th.
We need just one,
Huh?
one affidavit.
If we have any affidavit ballots, yep. Yeah, I know, it's,
Experience tells us that we have.
Yes. It's gonna be better because we narrowed it down, the points, there's not gonna be as much confusion, so we hopefully they'll go to the right ones, but I think we'll have that up there.
yeah, so,
Yes, I'm out of town actually after I vote tomorrow, so will not be around. If that's what you're looking
no, that's fine. Tomorrow night is a nice to have if there are 5 of us here, that doesn't matter. If by chance there's not affidavit ballots, then you're gonna be getting the text and email from me that we have to have a board meeting on Wednesday. That's the
Oh,
problem.
I was gonna say, I can be available tomorrow night if you need it. Or Wednesday
Be
morning.
be late tomorrow.
It would be like 9.
It would, yeah, it wouldn't be before 9:30, and that's only if there's no affidavit ballot. So here's my suggestion. I'm not gonna worry too much about tomorrow night. My suggestion is, just kind of check your calendar and everything, because it literally is it's a 2-minute meeting, we certify the results, that's it. We can do it Wednesday morning if people want to, you know, before they go into work, have a quick powwow in Pearl's office, whatever. And this absolutely is exempt from our normal, we don't posting and all that, because it has to meet the timeline. And then if there's an affidavit ballot, though, I do need you to get back to me and let me know when you're available on the 29th. Same thing, though, we don't have to keep our traditional time. If we want to do a morning meeting on the 29th.
29th is a Wednesday, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I won't be
on the 29th. Who knows, they could not, well, we're gonna have to make something work on the 29th. I mean, at that point, we would be in violation. I mean, what can they do?
What's
But,
that mean exactly though?
it means someone in theory could challenge the results if we don't certify it in the proper time frame. So,
Should have been booked there, so.
yeah. So, Pearl, if you can just note, Steve, right, Mr. Patch is definitely not available on the 29th. Anyone else definitely not available on the 29th? Okay, Tim? All right. So hopefully we can get a quorum if needed on the 29th. And then, Wednesday morning, you don't have to let me know now, Wednesday morning, Wednesday evening, whatever, if we needed that meeting to certify the results. If we have no outdated ballots, I just need to know if you're available for that, so if we pull 5 together, then we'll do it. Okay. All right, so late tomorrow night, by 9 o'clock, you'll know outdated ballots, right? I'll text you all, and we'll take it from there. Sound good? All right. And then, just one other thing I want to bring up tonight, I already warned Mr. Colbrufo. Sorry, it's the topic that never dies, but just based on feedback I'm hearing, I think we're gonna need to, as a board, look at again, in my humble opinion, the 8th grade trip, not because I'm for it or against it, but I've heard from a number of people that there's a number of students, parents, families that chose not to have their kids go to school for those 2 days because they'd already been advised that they weren't necessarily gonna be doing normal classwork. I heard from several students that they didn't do normal classroom work, that in 4 classes, they were, going outside and doing recess, whatever you want to call it.
Enrichment.
Sure, yeah. And so my only point in saying it is, it's clearly impacting everyone in the 8th grade class where they chose not to go on the trip, and I think that's some of the concerns.
To refresh my memory, and Lindell, you were here, didn't we say this will be the last
This
year?
is it.
So,
It's the last hurrah.
I was jumping up and down, that's why he knows I was here.
yeah,
That's an 8th grade teacher.
so,
And I just want to clarify, the last as it exists in its current form, right? I mean, I don't think the board is saying, and I'm certainly not saying, I'm not against an 8th grade trip. I'm against an 8th grade trip that,
that small amount.
when
of
it's not
students.
required, takes kids out of class for
Yeah.
2 days and impacts the entire class, but I think they
But
absolutely.
the 8th grade trip, as we know it today, is
Is done.
done.
Correct.
That was my understanding.
With current conditions, with
Unless
so
they
few amount of
Get a trip
students.
that the majority of the students and staff were willing to, and
Correct.
excited about going there.
Which is on the weekend.
All right. Perfect. And then with that, turn it over to the superintendent and the superintendent's report. It's been a whole week. What you got?
Well, one of them is unified basketball, but I don't have to touch upon that again.
No PowerPoint today?
Our student board member.
That's a point.
Okay, this is gonna be quick. The following spring teams are New York State Scholar Athlete teams. Baseball, girls golf, girls lacrosse, softball, tennis, girls outdoor track and field. And I did want to say that the varsity softball, I went out there, Alicia Crandall did a phenomenal job in raising the money, and it was our school against Cortland, and they sponsored breast cancer, and it was phenomenal. And then tonight's game that I was going to go to was the senior night, but it got postponed because of the rain. But great kids on the team. That concludes my superintendent report.
Well done. All right, with that, I will make a motion for item F1, which is the approval of a resolution for the district to allow the DEC to possess the former Cleveland Elementary School prior to closing and transfer of title.
I will second.
Second by Mr. McCarthy, which opens it up for discussion. So update for the board is, Tom and I signed the contract, offer, everything today as far as the actual offer. We'd already approved the price as a board and given that authority. This is asking for the same authority with the pre-possession agreement. Details still to be worked out. The bottom line is they're locked into buying it. Now they want to, as soon as they can, I think, get people in there and start using it with some conditions as far as not making material changes to the building until closing and all that. So with that, it's open for discussion before we vote on it.
No discussion on mine.
They're acquiesced to official.
So, Pro, just one, well, whoever, Maureen, anyone, the resolution for the sale giving Tom and I authority to sign had a 30-day pause period built in. This doesn't. It's not needed for this?
No, because we already have the
Okay.
purchase offer.
All right.
This is just kind of a little interim piece.
When do they want to get in there?
As soon as possible. He was saying he was going to be by the end of May for this first class. I went with a high number, and they said, well, thank you, but we'll wait, and we'll do it in parish. And then I said, well, hold on a second. We looked at our actual carrying costs, and then they were only able to go. So our original carrying costs were like $4,800. They were willing to go at $8,200, which Paul Brissett said, yes, that's, for what we're paying and sending crews out there and whatnot, let's do it.
Andy, and I just double checked again, but what was the agreement with them with respect to liability? Insurance coverage, if somebody gets hurt, owners still, liability still
I'll leave
falls
that
on
to
them.
Tom
Yeah, we
Maurice.
just
I
had
know
that
they had the
conversation.
conversations.
I know that you raised it before, so I just wanted, what was
We're kind of working on that right now. We're kind of trying to get mutual indemnification. And obviously, there you have insurance and we have insurance and we both prove that to each other. That's kind of one of the items that's being discussed as we speak, how to mutually indemnify each other.
Okay, my only concern with indemnification is that we still get sued, we still have to pay the cost of defending the suit. Because as an owner, we're just legally bound by New York State law that we are responsible if someone gets hurt on their property. The indemnification, 3, 6, 8 years later, after we finally, seek the indemnification from them, comes into play, certainly. I mean, we could get refunded money that if we have to pay a settlement out or something like that, but that's my primary concern with having them in there. We had talked before about, you said no material changes, but whose definition of material will that be? Because, for instance, labor law in New York, if they install a clock on the wall and it involves electrical work or anything like that, if that worker falls off the ladder, that's on us. So,
And that really is what this resolution is doing, is it's giving, well, Tom and I, the authority to sign the final document, but it's really for Tom and Maureen to work on behalf of the district to work out all those details, because
okay.
in theory, they can't do that until we pass this resolution.
Right,
I mean-
in total, it's just 3 classrooms. So the closing, they don't think it's gonna go is past 6 months, but they said it's really the gym and 2 classrooms is all they're gonna be using. So it's a lot smaller scope than I really originally thought.
For this initial tenancy?
Yes.
We don't have to do an IEP.
No. 5 to 4.
Okay, but that, again, I just want to say, that's the only, I mean, I think it's great, I would, like everyone else, I would like them in, but I mean, it's just part of the law to protect workers and everything else so that they have a source to recover from, and that primary target would be on us and the owners of the properties.
So what exactly is the rest of them actually? What are they doing?
They're sitting in front of a chalkboard mostly.
Don't get me wrong, this is not employee,
So I
so,
understand.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's, labor law, so if they're in there working, doing construction, doing anything like that, it's not DEC people, even, an electrician they bring in to fix a faulty outlet, if they have to run some wires, if it is deemed an alteration to the building or anything like that, which is all kinds of case law about what exactly that is, that our attorneys that are involved in this whole process are very well aware of, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'm gonna assume that when we get to that point, that in the pre-possession agreement, it's basically gonna say any work that needs to be done to the building would be referred to the district would contract from the outside. So the reality is,
It would be called.
yeah, we're not indemnified anything, it is our property. But they're not gonna do it without our knowledge. But that really is no different than if they didn't pre-possess it and, you found some foul because they're doing inspection every week.
Well, right, but I mean, they're buying the building, they're going to the doors, and they're gonna do those kind of things. That's not happening until after they are.
They're just going in 3 classrooms. They all do pay.
Any other discussion?
This cost covers everything that we can foresee the issue outside of the catastrophic.
And I did see if the heating goes over and electric goes over, they're gonna cover that.
And even, I think, by the time the final possessions there, catastrophic, there will be a clause in there where basically we negotiate that back.
But Maureen Bethany obviously is working.
It's Kevin Cole.
Or not Bethany, but someone.
It's it's somebody
Just
from
does
their
real
firm.
estate.
I just wanna make sure that we're aware of that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? We have a motion for item G, consent agenda. Mr. McCarthy, second. Mr. Patch, discussion? All those in favor? make a motion for item H in its entirety, personnel, instructional, non-instructional. Second by Ms. Lloyd. Any discussion on H?
Just had some sort of, training involved the, curriculum consultant. Just had a presentation on the last board meeting. It said curriculum consultant about the training.
You talking about letters training? You talk, yeah. So you talking about the reading initiative?
So this person is, so who fills the shoes?
Yeah, that has to be posted. Yeah, so he's referring, so Kira Prince got hired as an administrator in another district as an assistant principal. So it would be normal posting of position. We don't post positions like this until after the budget is passed. And so that's tomorrow, and then we can continue on.
And Mike is, because there's that summer training that I talked about last week, so Mike has one slot that still needs to be assigned, and his plan is to, whoever gets appointed for that position, to send them for that, so that that person gets that training
So down the road, they'll get the training.
over the summer, yep.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of H? Thank you. And I make a motion that the Central Square School District adjourn the meeting. Can I get a second? Mr. Loy, any discussion? All those in favor? And it is unanimous. Thank you.
We've got time to shoot some.